we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast for any reason, let us know. If you want to hear about a topic, how you felt about an episode we've done, or if you want to join us here as a guest, reach out in our DMs on the Instagrams or the Twitters at the Bigmark Podcast or at the Bigmark Pod, respectively there, or hit us up in the comments either on YouTube. And if you're there, make sure to subscribe to the channel and make sure you like the video if you do. I don't want to force you to do anything you don't want to do, people. Of course not. Please let your friends know about the podcast. Let them know how you feel, and tell them where to find us. If you're watching on Spotify or anywhere else, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And again, just spread the love. And if you want to go that extra mile, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/BigMarkPod. Those are all the best ways to support, but you are doing the best ways. You being here listening or watching is the best possible support for the show. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to be touching on a subject this week that's, I think if you're on Instagram or any social media, you might be seeing a few more memes about this. There's a chance that you're not, but you might be wondering why the fuck, I guess every beginning of November we start hearing more and more about the Edmund Fitzgerald, but why the hell is it so popular this year? And it is because it is the 50th anniversary. If you will, take yourself back to November 10th, 1975. Imagine a violent gale roars across Lake Superior, winds up to 60 knots, waves reaching 35 feet. And in the middle of it all, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a 729-foot freighter, vanishes without a single distress call. 29 men lost, no survivors, no bodies recovered. The largest ship on the Great Lakes at the time, gone in minutes. And even now, 50 years later, the why remains a mystery. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the story, the legend, and the unanswered questions surrounding the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Talk about the pride of the Great Lakes herself, the storm that should have been survivable, the final radio calls, and of course the search, the investigation, and the legacy. I mean, I don't know about y'all. The first time I ever heard about the Edmund Fitzgerald was from the song, but if you know anything about shipwrecks or just the shipping history of the Great Lakes, it is quite fascinating. I'm sure I could do an entire podcast episode just on the history alone of the Great Lakes, and all the shipping that goes on through there is pretty surprising, because you can get from Lake Superior, which is like the if we're going west to east across the map, Lake Superior is like the furthest left, I guess you could say. And then that moves all the way across through all the lakes and Michigan and Huron and Erie and Ontario. And then that connects to the St. Lawrence River and the St. Lawrence Causeway and all this fucking shit and all these lock systems and all this stuff. They all are connected to the Atlantic Ocean. So you can literally bring a ship, if it's, the right size, you can literally bring a ship from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Michigan. And that's pretty fucking wild. And, that's a major shipping route, and that's a major way you can get a lot of goods into, essentially the middle of America. I mean, Chicago, Michigan's not in Chicago, but Chicago is on Lake Michigan, I believe. What lake is Chicago on? Because it's on a Great Lake. It can't be this fucking Franks and Beans. Yeah, it's on Lake Michigan. Am I right, people? Come on. Sorry, I'm just pulling this shit up here, Jamie. Yeah, Chicago is on Lake Michigan, right? So you can literally, it's a port city. That's why it's such a big fucking port city, because it was kind of the end of the line for a lot of stuff too, or the start of the line for certain things too. And all the steel that was made in Pittsburgh and shit would like go up, and you could send that all the way up through the fucking lakes and shit. So pretty fucking fascinating. And in 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald was launched. It was named after Edmund Fitzgerald, who at the time was the president of the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. It was built by Great Lakes Engineering Works, cost about $7 million, which was huge for its time. 725 feet long, which is just short of 2 football fields, and was the biggest ship of the time that was, going to be rocking the Great Lakes. Let's just put it that way. Known for its speed and style, often called the Queen of the Great Lakes. It carried taconite iron ore pellets, the raw material for steel making. Captain Ernest McSorley, seasoned, respected, nearing retirement, was the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald at the time of its unfortunate wreck. 40 years on the lakes, known as calm under pressure. Ernest McSorley was a great captain. He was well seasoned, as they say. And unfortunately, this was to be one of his last voyages. And on November 9th, 1975, the Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, bound for Detroit. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, actually followed behind. Wasn't too close, or wasn't too far, and didn't have them in visual sight because there was a storm, but had them on the radar. Weather forecast warned of a storm, but nothing unusual for November. And the reason why it was nothing unusual is because during November, it's kind of the Great Lakes' own version of hurricane season, and the mariners call it the Witch of November. So it's, definitely more storm activity and things like that. In fact, there's a storm brewing right now here in Hamilton, Ontario, which we are on Lake Ontario, so we get a lot of those lake effect storms and all these things. And I mean, Superior is a different lake. Like we're going to talk about it a little bit, but there's a lot of things about Lake Superior that are different. It's the deepest lake. It's deeper and has more water in it than all the other Great Lakes combined. And it's just, again, these are called Great Lakes because they're fresh water, but they're essentially inland seas, and like they get legit fucking storms. Like I said, we're talking 35-foot waves. Like this is real deal Holyfield fucking storms. But again, nothing new for Captain Ernest McSorley. But by the morning of November 10th, the storm intensified faster than expected. Winds were gusting over 70 miles per hour. Waves climbed to 25, then 30 feet. Snow, sleet, freezing spray. Captain McSorley reported over the radio, "We're taking heavy seas over the deck. We've lost both radars." So the Fitzgerald is blind and relying on radio updates from the Anderson. The Anderson acts as her eyes, navigating by compass and dead reckoning. And McSorley says, "Stark, we're holding our own." But crew and members on the Anderson report seeing monstrous waves, mountainous seas, quote unquote. At 7:10 p.m. was the last radio contact. The Anderson radioed, "Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problem?" McSorley, "We are holding our own." Moments later, radar contact lost. So the captain of the Anderson, like I said that they had them on the radar, and then all of a sudden, they were gone. No distress call, no signal, just silence. Which, again, it's really weird, right? Like, you think about all this stuff. It's like, was the captain just hoping for the best? Like, even in bad times, like a good captain's going to be able to say, hey, we're going down here. How are we going to save the people's lives? We're going to lose the ship. Yeah, but how are we going to save the men's lives? 29 guys on the ship. Like, what happened so quickly that there was nothing anyone could do? I mean, maybe there's a chance that like a fucking hella wave came over the deck and just knocked everyone out that was in the cabin, just like the pilot and everybody just got fucking toasted instantly. And then the ship, like, there's a bunch of different, we'll get there in a sec, but there's a bunch of different things that you got to think about. It's like, how did it just happen so quickly? So again, like I said, the Anderson reported losing sight of the Fitzgerald, and the Coast Guard dispatch began immediately searching aircraft, cutters, nearby ships. By midnight, there was some debris found, lifeboats, oil slick, life rings, all torn apart. But no bodies, no survivors. The next day, sonar detects 2 large objects on the lake bed 530 feet down. Later confirmed the Fitzgerald had broken 2, bow and stern lying separately, both upright. Theories emerge, structural failure from rogue waves. So essentially, what could have happened is, as the ship is going up and down on these waves, a rogue wave is when a few waves, or at least more than one wave, kind of converges into a big one. And what can happen is essentially the ship can be at the top of it and one side, and it can kind of like break over the wave. It can get stuck at the bottom of a wave. So like when waves are, when you're going up and down the wave, so to speak, and you're about to come back up, essentially, if that angle is so steep of the ship coming down and it can't ride back up, it'll kind of just like torpedo underneath the wave and go under. Obviously, when the waves are so high, they have to go. So they're coming from, the lake bed is only so far down. So when you are actually at the bottom of some of these waves, the water isn't as deep as it normally is, because again, you kind of have to think about like the displacement of things, right? If the water's now 30 feet up in the air, it's now also 30 feet shallower in certain areas. And I guess maybe that's not exact science, but at least there's chances that the ship could have ran the ground somehow, and then that's what caused it to break in two. But anyway, there was flooding from open cargo hatches, and there may have been what's known as a Three Sisters wave, which is basically 3 massive waves striking in sequence, or essentially a combination of all three of these things happening. All these things I mentioned could have essentially happened, but no single explanation has ever satisfied everyone. The U.S. Coast Guard's investigation, which was in 1977, so a couple years later, concluded that water likely entered through faulty cargo hatch covers, so it was kind of coming over the top and into the ship. And the ship flooded and sank in less than 30 seconds, so there was really nothing anyone could have done. I mean, if it broke in two and all of a sudden it falls back and stuff, that's going to shoot everybody in the who know? I don't know how quickly these things happen, but you're going to be, if the ship all of a sudden breaks in two, it's not going to just stay in two pieces like this. Something's fucking going up and down, right? Titanic style, right? But again, it's just how scary it must have been, of course, all these things, but the fact that there was still no distress signal and maybe the captain didn't necessarily see this coming. The National Transport Safety Board disagreed, actually, with the U.S. Coast Guard investigation and suggested structural failure from excessive stress. So they're going with that one. Probably too much weight on the ship is what they thought. The Canadian Marine Commission did their own study, and they actually proposed a rogue wave theory. So there was controversy over whether the Fitzgerald was overloaded, of course, like I mentioned, but it was loaded just below the maximum, so it wasn't overloaded. But some say the added stress weakened the hull just over years of and it's the pride of the Great Lakes, right? Is always trying to push the boundaries, it seemed, and maybe over all those years of pushing the maximum, just below the maximum is still pretty close to the fucking maximum, right? So pushing that over years might have done things. And families of the crew criticized the official reports as incomplete. No bodies, no voice recordings, no warning. Again, how could they know for sure? Like, where's the black box of this whole thing? Where is all this stuff? And, they say, it's in, they say Lake Superior never gives up her dead. The lake keeps the bodies because it's such a low oxygen, such a cold environment that there's not a lot of breakdown of the microbes and your body's normal gut flora and stuff. After you die, that shit kind of stays alive and still keeps making carbon dioxide and all these different things. And that's what makes these bodies bloat, and that's when they float up in, unfortunately, normal circumstances when there's a dead person in a body of water. But in Lake Superior, it's so cold and so deep that the bodies just don't float back up. And that's what they mean by Superior keeps her dead. And again, that added to how hard this was to find out what happened, right? And understand what happened. Even though I don't know. It sounds like they probably could have done some more investigation potentially, or I'm not even sure really. It sounds like things were pretty dicey with these things. I know I didn't really look into any of the like if any conspiracy theories or anything greasy when it comes to this stuff. But again, how could they know for sure? Now I like probably many people, first time I ever heard about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was listening to the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. In 1976, only a year after the tragedy, Canadian songwriter Gordon Lightfoot released the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And it truly transformed this tragedy into a legend. It evoked the human cost, the haunting refrain, does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? It's haunting, right? That stuff stays with you. The song became a national elegy, especially in Canada and the Great Lakes region, right? Played every November 10th in memorial ceremonies and at the Maritime Sailors Cathedral when the bell tolls 29 times, once for each man lost. The wreck itself remains preserved, divers and submersible visit, but this song prevails. And there's, because of that cold and that depth, I don't know, man. There could very well be like essentially untouched bodies. Like, I don't know, maybe fish are going down there and munching. So who's to say about bods? But the ship is still down there, but the song still remains. And, everyone probably knows the lyrics. Everyone's heard of them before. Or if you haven't heard the song, even just the lyrics themselves, they tell the story. It's pretty fantastic. The legend lives on from the Chippewa down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi, Lake Superior. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty, that good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. The ship was the pride of the American side coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned. Concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. And later that night, when the ship's bell rang, could have been the north wind they'd been feeling. The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late, and the breakfast had to wait. When the gales of November came slashing, when afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck, saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed ya." At 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know ya." The captain wired in. He had water coming in, and the good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up, or they might have capsized. They might have broke deep and took water. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. Lake Huron roars, Superior sings in the rooms of her ice-water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. The islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. In a musty old hall in Detroit they played, in the Maritime Sailors' Cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. The legend lives on from the Chippewa down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early. Like I said, chilling, haunting lyrics, amazing. I think that whole line alone, that just about all the Great Lakes, is so beautiful the way they did it. Actually, funny enough, there's a Hamilton band called Harlan Pepper, and they did a song about Great Lakes, and they did some cool wordplay with it, but just incredible. Again, there's just something about these lakes, right? Like, you talk to Indigenous Canadians and people of the, people of the land that Canada is, or whatever you want to say. I don't know. The people who are here, natives, they hold these lakes with such supreme reverence, and as they should be. These things are powerful places, and actually there's some cryptid legends and stuff about Lake Superior, at least, that there's this Black Panther monster in there, and that's the one that actually takes down all these ships. But since 1975, since the wreck of them in Fitzgerald, that was the last shipwreck on the Great Lakes, which is actually insane. And again, this is kind of one of these things where, was this storm survivable? Was there something wrong with the ship? Was it, what happened? What was pushing it? And actually reading those lyrics also reminded me, they weren't very far. They were only 17 miles from Whitefish Bay, which is a place that they could have docked and potentially saved everyone and the ship. But they had no radar, so they wouldn't have known per se. They had contact with Anderson, but at the same time, it didn't work out, and that's what makes it so much more tragic, right? Because it was close, and maybe the whole crew thought everything was okay until it wasn't. You know what I mean? Like I said, the song is still played in memorial ceremonies, and it's super important. And I think, again, that's one of these things where the wreck itself, it still remains preserved, and divers and submersibles visit but cannot disturb it because it's like a grave site. The ship's bell was recovered in 1995 and is now displayed at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Whitefish Point. So it did make it to Whitefish somehow. A replacement bell engraved with 29 times was placed on the wreck as a permanent tribute. Again, the chilling phrase, Lake Superior never gives up her dead. The cold, the depth, preserves everything, and even the memory. Edmund Fitzgerald reminds us that even in the age of steel and radio, nature still holds the final say. Like I said, the ship sank in sight of safety, just 17 miles from Whitefish Bay. So close, as Lightfoot sang, to being home. Some stories are solved with evidence, others endure as warnings. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is both. Like I said, no other shipwreck since 1975. And the 50th anniversary of the men who died in the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, we salute you, and we think about you when Gordon sings about you, at least. So your memory endures. Even though you went down for fucking maybe no reason. You know what I mean? It's a shame. We should be able to do these things safely. And it looks like we figured out how to do these things safely. So, before I continue to ruin the mood here, thank y'all for listening. Remember the men and the wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald. Love y'all. See you next week. Peace.